Icewind Dale is a hack-and-slash computer role-playing game developed by Black Isle Studios and published in June 2000 by Interplay Entertainment. Players created a party of up to 6 adventurers and explored the deadly northern frontier of the advanced Dungeons & Dragons Forgotten Realms setting. The game was based on BioWare's 1998 title Baldur's Gate, and shared many of its older cousin's features and mechanics, such as the engine, the tweaked AD&D 2nd edition rules, an isometric camera, and a real-time with pause combat system that could also provide a pseudo-turn-based experience. Black Isle were open about the fact that Icewind Dale was a more linear, combat-heavy experience than Baldur's Gate. Whereas Baldur's Gate balanced combat with exploration, questing, and conversing with NPCs, Black Isle producer Chris Parker told journalists that in Icewind Dale, you're either going to be in a fight or licking your wounds from the last one. The phrase dungeon crawl was frequently thrown about, reflecting the fact that much of the game is spent delving into sprawling, multi-level mega-dungeons that put the sparse mines and narrow tunnels of Baldur's Gate to shame. According to Interplay's Brian Fargo, who ranks Icewind Dale as his favourite of the Infinity Engine games, launch sales greatly exceeded the publisher's expectations. Reviewers were generally positive, lauding Icewind Dale as a more hardcore alternative to contemporary action RPGs like Diablo 2, with many noting the game's strong art direction and singling out its score by the one and only Jeremy Soule for special praise. The ability to create your own party in single player was also a welcome addition for most reviewers, though a number did bemoan the lack of unique NPC companions from Baldur's Gate. Common criticisms included the game's linearity, an unengaging story and characters, technical issues, and in particular a lack of originality compared to more ambitious RPGs released the same year. Some reviewers even thought Black Isle and BioWare were the same team due to similarities between Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale. It's therefore no surprise that Icewind Dale was quickly forgotten when the juggernaut that was Baldur's Gate 2 hit shelves a few months later. Nevertheless, Icewind Dale's success led Black Isle to release an expansion called Heart of Winter in 2001, featuring a new main quest, new areas, spells, abilities, and equipment, raising the level cap again, and introducing some of the engine improvements from Baldur's Gate 2, such as higher resolutions and new character sprites. It also introduced a new difficulty option called Heart of Fury, which was essentially a New Game Plus mode, increasing the health and damage of enemies and rebalancing some encounters to make them more challenging. Reviews for Heart of Winter were fairly positive, though there was something of a backlash over what some considered its relatively short length considering the expansion's price tag. A free dungeon set, titled Trial of the Lure Master, was made available on the Black Isle site a few months later, in which the party is whisked away from Icewind Dale and trapped in a haunted desert keep, where they must survive new monsters and traps as they try to solve the riddles of the mysterious spectral Lure Master. Black Isle Studios were in a difficult spot in the late 90s. Though the team released some of the most famous and well-received RPGs of the era, there was frustration over organizational difficulties at Interplay's RPG division, and several projects, such as Fallout 3, had gone awry over technological problems, like having to adapt to new game engines. Black Isle head Fergus Urquhart needed a new project to set his team back on track.
With Icewind, so it just wasn't going well, and Interplay was having a lot of financial problems, and I needed to come up with something that was more of a sure thing, not a sure thing from a standpoint of like it was just a phone it in project, but like the technology wasn't an issue. And so like, well, we have the Fallout engine, you know, but like that's kind of reaching the end of its road. And then we obviously work with Bio really well, and we have that engine. So how could we use that? And that's just where the idea. And this one I can say, I mean, I not, you know, very few of the great ideas that I'm associated with in my career are mine. But this one was really one that I said, let's do a dungeon crawler. You know, let's take the Baldur's Gate engine and let's do a dungeon crawler. Just focus on combat.
A streamlined, combat-driven spin-off to Baldur's Gate seemed a reasonable bet, and Interplay announced Icewind Dale in 1999 for a release the next year. Interplay tried to capitalise on BioWare's success by hyping the game as a Baldur's Gate engine adventure. Black Isle did add their own tweaks to BioWare's Infinity engine, such as additional user interface buttons, integrated multiplayer matching, and so-called bumping technology, so that party members could shunt each other out of the way. The rule set and mechanics of the game were also modified, with additions like adding new spells and an increased level cap over Baldur's Gate. Black Isle were reportedly instructed to try and avoid using established characters and properties connected to the setting, hence the game's story being set several hundred years before the events of Baldur's Gate, and what were at the time contemporary Forgotten Realms plotlines, such as R.A. Salvatore's Drizzt books. It doesn't sound like Icewind Dale suffered an unusually difficult development process, at least compared to its sequel, so the relatively short development time was probably offset by the benefits of working off an established engine and mechanics. However, in an interview with Computer Games Online, producer Darren Monahan said, "We only had a year of development time, but it seems more like 6 months." Defending the somewhat limited improvements Icewind Dale made to the original Baldur's Gate formula. The CGO article also claimed that contractual issues with BioWare, which, it claimed, doesn't want this game to encroach on Baldur's Gate 2 territory, limited Icewind Dale's scope. For example, this legal angle was apparently the reason for the original game's 640 by 480 resolution. Perhaps BioWare were concerned that Icewind Dale would overshadow engine improvements they were working on for Baldur's Gate 2. Some of the names involved in Icewind Dale and Heart of Winter will be well known to Black Isle and Obsidian fans, particularly designers Chris Avallone and Josh Sawyer, and of course studio head Fergus Urquhart. But many others, like producer Chris Parker and artist Jason Manley, haven't quite gotten the recognition they deserve. There are quite a few recognisable voice actors involved in Icewind Dale, from big names like Ron Perlman.
Enough. Your words honor me, but they are wasted on these outlanders. They know nothing of our ways, and must surely find such things tedious.
And Mark Hamill, to talent you might recognise from other games and cartoons, such as Tony J.
If it is evil that you seek, then you need look no further. I stand here before you. However, I am not the one who plagues Kaldahar. For that evil, you must look elsewhere.
Jim Cummings.
Balance is the harmony that is achieved when man and nature learn to coexist, no longer contending with one another, but coming together as two parts of a whole.
Kevin Michael Richardson.
I announce Wolfdane, blessed and guided by the spirit of Jared, once king of the tribe of the bear, now king of the tribe of the great worm.
And many others. After its successful release, Black Isle would continue to support Icewind Dale with downloadable portraits and voice packs, which were later bundled into Heart of Winter. Based on comments from Josh Sawyer, it seems Fergus Urquhart was quite stung by criticisms of Heart of Winter's length, and that concerns over this are what resulted in the Lure Master patch in the first place. Icewind Dale would lie dormant for many years, aside from a repackaged re-release on goodoldgames.com, until Trent Osler's Beamdog and Overhauled Games released Icewind Dale Enhanced Edition in 2014. The Enhanced Edition is based on Beamdog's heavily modified Infinity Next engine, and features many changes from the original, from art and graphics to rule set and gameplay mechanics. Josh Sawyer was asked about the Enhanced Edition in a 2015 interview, and he said that although it was a nice update and it was cool to see the game running on tablets and consoles, some of these additions destroyed the original game's balance. Although Icewind Dale Enhanced Edition didn't receive anything close to the backlash of Beamdog's treatment of Baldur's Gate, I consider it an entirely different version of the game, and won't be covering the Enhanced Edition in this video. However, be aware that you can no longer digitally purchase Icewind Dale separately from the Icewind Dale Enhanced Edition. Though Icewind Dale was, and still is, characterised as a hack and slash or dungeon crawler, these terms are a little too vague to provide an accurate representation of the experience. Icewind Dale is not a fast-paced, accessible, instant gratification experience like Diablo 2 or Dungeon Siege. Though at the time the Infinity Engine games were considered more beginner-friendly than classic RPGs, like the Gold Box games or the Ultima series, this was still an era in which the average player was expected to read the flipping manual, a manual that was several hundred pages long. On top of this, it was obviously assumed that the average Icewind Dale player was likely to have already played through Baldur's Gate, and the manual explicitly identifies which areas this demographic should review before creating their party. Based on more recent reviews, modern players and journalists can still find themselves baffled by core concepts like THAC0, the counterintuitive armor class system, and save versus mechanics. Black Isle explicitly stated that Icewind Dale was built around the so-called nuclear party. That is, a balanced party that includes at least one melee fighter, a spellcaster, a thief with the ability to search for traps and pick locks, and a cleric to heal, cure, and buff the party. A new player may very well fudge their first party, so the tutorial encounters, a gang of goblins and a cave full of orcs, will help give the player an idea of whether they've messed up with character creation. Unlike its action-oriented hack-and-slash contemporaries, Icewind Dale does not let you progress quickly and without thought. It can be slow and sometimes punishing, with the average player needing to edge forward through maps in order to search for traps and avoid triggering too many enemies at once. Once in combat, fights can involve a lot of pausing in order to stop and think about how to react to tactical challenges. Though the game includes a number of AI scripts for your party members to follow, these are unlikely to be sufficient for challenging battles. Some enemies can inflict crippling or deadly status effects that require special potions to cure, and the death of a party member can incur obscene fees in temple services once you trek all the way back to town. Over time, the party will be able to deal with these challenges more effectively thanks to a wider variety of spells and recharging item abilities, but there will always be a point at which the adventurers need to head all the way back to the nearest hub area to restock supplies, sell loot, and use local services to identify magic items. In Baldur's Gate, this usually meant shuffling to the edge of the map and picking the closest town from the overworld menu, praying you weren't ambushed by wyverns or ogres on the way. Though Icewind Dale does feature an overland screen, there are no random encounters, and most regions consist of several layers of very large dungeons or cave networks, with no shortcuts to the surface. So you could easily find yourself waiting for the party to navigate from one end of the map to the other, heading up one level, then repeating the process several times. Aside from one notable NPC in a particular area, there are no scrolls of town portal or teleportation devices to help the party dump their loot and get back in the action, and it's rare to run into shopkeepers or priests whilst on the job, so inventory management is a necessary part of the experience. Like Baldur's Gate, the game's difficulty is mitigated by the ability to quick save virtually anywhere, and set up camp to heal your party, recharge daily abilities, and rememorize spells. Having a good balance of spells and equipment is important, as some enemies are resistant and immune to, or specialize in, particular types of damage. A good healer should be able to not only restore health, but also neutralize poisons and disease, and help protect against or remove certain status effects. Regardless of how carefully a new player progresses through the game, there's almost certainly going to be a point at which they suffer a total party wipe and have to reload and approach the fight with some foreknowledge. The most difficult fights in the game inevitably involve a lot of preparation, with the adventurers quaffing the rarest and most powerful magic potions, and spellcasters putting up all their offensive and defensive buffs. At its core, Icewind Dale is meant to appeal to players who really enjoy delving into the nitty-gritty of Infinity Engine combat, and don't need a strong narrative or NPC interaction to maintain their interest. Though Icewind Dale is clearly not what we would today refer to as a AAA game, art and sound design are by no means those of a budget title. There are hundreds of beautiful pre-rendered backgrounds and creature sprites, some carried over from Baldur's Gate, and others created specifically for Icewind Dale. Those who've played other Infinity Engine titles like Baldur's Gate 2 will notice some crossover between monster sprites, with different approaches taken by BioWare and Black Isle's art departments towards classic monsters like Umberhulks, trolls, golems, and elementals. Rather than the CGI movies of Baldur's Gate, Icewind Dale's opening and closing cutscenes are akin to a wandering artist's sketchbook, with a more painterly style for chapter transitions. Heart of Winter follows in this tradition, though Trials of the Lure Master is lacking in this respect. Jeremy Soul's score has gained a lot of attention, particularly the main theme, East Haven, and Kuldahar tracks. In many cases, environmental ambience is part of the songs, so some areas might sound a little lifeless when the soundtrack isn't playing. Soul's work on Heart of Winter is equally great, though Trials of the Lore Master doesn't seem to feature any new music. On the whole, voice-acted dialogue is both less prevalent and somewhat more restrained than that of Baldur's Gate. Many NPCs and enemies from Baldur's Gate have become quite notorious for their one-liners.
Hey, sexy. Do you want to take a look at me, Diddy?
Hey, sorry, friend, but you've got a date down under.
By contrast, the only spoken lines in Icewind Dale will be your party's battle cries and a handful of main quest NPCs.
Oh, I hope I don't get in the way.
Heart of Winter seems to feature more voice acting than Icewind Dale, though this might just be due to content being more condensed, with less of a wait between important conversations.
Come, why does anyone hide?
Once again, Lure Master is the odd man out, with only a few new creature sounds. Much of its budget seems to have gone into creating the new pre-rendered backgrounds. Icewind Dale is unusual for an RPG in that it lacks a central protagonist. The player-created party has no preset relationships, backgrounds, or identity beyond those of race, gender, and class. Whereas in Baldur's Gate, Charname is an important part of the story, and your party have their own established personalities and motivations, the story of Icewind Dale is contained entirely within the central narrative and the world itself. The player's party are a group of adventurers who find themselves in Easthaven, a small trading town on the shores of Icewind Dale's Lac Dinnershire, built around a temple to the barbarian hero Jared, who defeated a powerful wizard and his army before sacrificing himself to seal a portal the wizard had opened to Dungeons & Dragons' version of Hell. After completing a few quests, the party join a military expedition to assist Kuldahar, a settlement built into the roots of a great tree. The expedition is ambushed, and the party must fight their way through various evil creatures who claim to feel a powerful and inexplicable call to gather in this area. Upon reaching Kuldahar, the adventurers speak to the druid Arundel, who asks them to investigate the evils plaguing the area. The basic formula from this point onwards is that players will go to an area, investigate by killing hundreds of monsters and looting the whole place, report back to Arundel, and then head off to the next location. Eventually the players will be sent to the Severed Hand, which is a sort of secondary quest hub with several shopkeepers and new side quests. Around 50 to 60% through the game, the party will arrive at the ancient dwarf stronghold of Dawn's Deep, which is effectively one massive interconnected location, with everything from aquariums, frost giant lairs, Etin caves, ancient tombs, forges, palaces, gnome villages, and so on. Once the party acquires 6 MacGuffins from the evil overlords of these areas, they can unlock access to the antagonist, who will magic them away to an earlier location for the final chapter and the end boss. It's a standard fantasy tale of heroes and villains, with few opportunities for role-playing or player choice. Heart of Winter is similarly linear, though it takes a slightly different approach in tone. The party travels to the town of Lonelywood, the first settlement in the path of a massive coalition of native barbarian tribes that threaten war against the civilized southern settlers of Icewind Dale's 10 towns. The party will be sent to negotiate with the leader of this army, a barbarian chief called Wulfdane, who was supposedly killed and resurrected with the spirit of Jared, the same ancient hero mentioned in the original Icewind Dale. It's soon revealed that the spirit inhabiting Wulfdane may not be who they claim to be, so the adventurers visit an ancient burial site and the remote Gloomfrost Glacier to discover the truth. Many of the stories and characters in Heart of Winter are more down-to-earth and topical than those of Icewind Dale. The hub of Lonelywood features quests about local poachers, a failed business, a dysfunctional family, trade deals, and a jaded woman prostituting herself to anyone who promises to take her away from frontier life. Of course, this is a D&D adventure, so there are plenty of wizards, ghosts, monsters, and prophecies here. But where the villain of Icewind Dale was the Forgotten Realms equivalent of Dick Dastardly, Heart of Winter's antagonist is eloquent and persuasive. Trials of the Lure Master barely features a story at all. There's a Lure Master, and he makes the party undergo trials of combat. That's it. There is some background lore involving the original castellan of the keep, and his paranoia over a bard potentially revealing his dark secret, but it's not worth recounting. I think that, like a lot of CRPG fans, I consider Icewind Dale to be a bit of an also-ran in the history of the genre. Black Isle were quite open about the fact that they knew they weren't going to be changing the face of RPGs with Icewind Dale, and the lack of attention paid to the story and role-playing makes it difficult for the average person to become personally invested in any of the quests. In Baldur's Gate, you get a sense that your party members are their own person, and will react to the world around them and your choices, something that BioWare really doubled down on in the sequel. The player's party in Icewind Dale can't really do that. You could create a motley band of lawful good paladins and evil assassins, but there's not going to be any conflict or drama between them, beyond not being able to use certain items or avoiding certain spells that factor in character alignment. There are a tiny handful of situations in which class or race are acknowledged in quests or dialogue, such as a paladin noticing a disguised monster, or a small side quest being available to certain races. But there are far more situations where the game ignores or works against role-playing, like forced dialogue choices that may conflict with the player's view of a character's personality. There's a scene in which the antagonist taunts the party over the face of a town, but there's no particular reason the player would even care about this town. The player probably spent about half an hour actually doing anything in the town itself, and their characters may not have any personal connection to it for role-playing purposes. Similarly, major characters might be killed off, but you really have to force yourself to give a damn about people who are, to you, just walking vending machines. Naturally, there is a demographic that absolutely loves the ability to create your own party, rather than be limited to NPCs created by the developer. Some have rightly pointed out that, to a certain extent, you will get back what you put in, and that players who put real thought into fleshing out their party's backstory and motivations will enjoy taking them through Icewind Dale's campaign. Still, I think for the average player, myself included, pre-generated party members are more engaging than forcing the player to use their imagination and pretend the party are real people.
Evil, meet my sword! Sword, meet evil!
Perhaps with more time and a bigger budget for writing and side quests, there's still a lot that could be done to assist role-playing a player-created party. NPCs could be more reactive to established facts about the party, like a character being a paladin or an elf. And there should be more opportunities for the party to make moral choices and face consequences for those decisions. Some efforts were made towards this in the sequel, where NPCs are more aware of character racial backgrounds or being worshippers of a specific deity. And there were several preset adventuring parties with established backgrounds to choose from at the start of the campaign. Still, I don't think the Icewind Dale series will ever be fondly remembered for its character role-playing. Though the writing as a whole isn't much to write home about, there are some interesting characters and situations here and there. There's an unusually dark side quest in which one of the antagonists, a dark elf wizard, has effectively prostituted his sister to another antagonist, and the sister has developed some sort of Stockholm syndrome or whatever. If encountered in the antagonist's palace, She begs you not to hurt her abusive partner, and claims he's not a bad person really, she accidentally walked into a door, he isn't beating her, yada yada. The sister also admits that her brother probably lets this go on because she tortured and abused him when they were growing up, which, if you're familiar with Drow society in D&D, sounds entirely plausible. There isn't really a good solution to this quest. If you let her abusive partner go, you're arguably letting a murderer and petty tyrant who mutilates slaves escape from justice. If you kill him, you'll be locked out of the option of helping the Drow girl escape later on. Heart of Winter also features some thought-provoking writing. The barbarian king Wulfdane makes some very reasonable points about the history of the native tribes and the civilizing southern settlers.
Even now, our most holy site, Jared's Stone, is denied to us, sealed away beneath an outlander temple. We worship Tempas, not Tempus. Your people have even gone so far as to change his name and deny us even that small link.
As well as the chances of either group ever being able to live in harmony. There's an ulterior motivation here, of course, but even after being unmasked, the villain contends that there are parallels between what's happening to the barbarian tribes and the lessons of their own past. For me, the core weakness of Icewind Dale is the fact that for a combat-centered CRPG, Icewind Dale's encounter design is not all that impressive. On core difficulty, a huge proportion of fights in the game and its expansions are relatively straightforward melee-heavy affairs. Many monsters have their own strengths and weaknesses, but they rarely do anything particularly interesting. There are a handful of cases in which enemies will attempt to ambush the party, and even then they're not very smart about it. There's an entire area of enemies concealed in shadows, but their attempts at ambushing the party involve walking straight up to the nearest person, which in most cases will be your most heavily armoured frontline melee fighters. Even in the original Baldur's Gate, there were a number of enemy spellcasters with some nasty defensive spells like Mirror Image or Protection from Normal Missiles that added an extra layer of strategy to dealing with them. Not to mention having to protect against other nasty abilities like Sleep, Charm and Paralysis. Whilst some of these same spells exist in Icewind Dale, they're not used nearly as frequently. Apart from a couple of boss fights, I made very little attempt to protect my most vulnerable party members, beyond making sure they stayed in the back. This meant a whole slew of defensive spells were underutilized. This isn't to say Icewind Dale is never a difficult game, but it's a game where the difficulty usually comes from and is overcome with raw damage numbers or very basic tactics like kiting stronger enemies. I don't know if there was a conscious decision to limit the complexity of enemy encounters in order to make Icewind Dale more appealing to fans of more action-heavy hack-and-slash titles. But if so, it's an odd decision considering that they intended to draw in fans of Baldur's Gate. Icewind Dale has difficulty matching the variety and depth of many fights in its 1998 predecessor, let alone Shadows of Arm. It also shares many of the same weaknesses as its cousin. For example, the game can't really decide how to balance encounter design around whether the party has rested or not. The vast majority of areas have no barriers to letting your party snooze for a few hours between fights, and those that do just force you to amble back to the previous level. The pen and paper rules weren't really built around the players being a death squad that slaughters entire armies, and there's no dungeon master in a video game to step in and say, you don't have time for that, or no, you can't rest 5 meters away from the boss. What's strange is that there are several in-game dialogue references to safe rooms, and having to track all the way back outside the dungeon to sleep. I don't recall the original retail game being more restrictive about resting, so perhaps this is the vestigial remains of a more hardcore resting system? Or perhaps it's just meant to aid role players who want to make their own restrictions. Icewind Dale really needed to knock it out of the park with its combat, since other Infinity Engine games are able to mix up fighting with exploring towns and doing interesting side content. After hours of carving through monsters and juggling inventory, when you finally head back to a hub area like Kuldahar or the Severed Hand, there's often very little to do beyond sell your junk and head straight back out. Side quests are usually started and concluded by natural progression through the main quest, like running into someone's kidnapped son on the way to the next level, and making a mental note to mention it next time you're in town. Heart of Winter handles this much better, as there's more to do and see in Lonelywood, and the expansion gates some side quests behind main quest progression, such as a murder investigation. This means you're back at the hub more frequently, and there's sometimes new content to encounter between your dungeon crawls. Unfortunately, Trial of the Lure Master dispenses with even these cursory attempts at variety. If Icewind Dale and Heart of Winter were like a streamlined Baldur's Gate, then Lure Master is a streamlined Icewind Dale. There are a few gimmicks here and there, like enemies that teleport your party around the map, and an experiment in monster infighting, but it's mostly just a high-level party ploughing through hordes upon hordes of high-level enemies. I do think some criticisms of Lure Master were unfair. I saw more than one review criticise the gangs of spectral guards as being too difficult. Whilst these enemies hit hard and soak up a lot of damage, they don't hit your front line with the same damage spikes as giants or Ettins, and they have no special abilities or immunities beyond those of regular undead. So even a slightly under-leveled party should be able to deal with them. The only truly new enemies in Lure Master are Harpies, with everything else recycled from earlier Infinity Engine games. Even the loot in Lure Master isn't particularly interesting, since a Heart of Winter party is probably already kitted out pretty well, and there are no mind-blowingly powerful endgame craftables like in the Throne of Baal expansion to Baldur's Gate 2. Overall, it's pretty limp as endgame content goes. It feels like Black Isle just made the maps, then threw a bunch of high-level enemies in there and called it a day. It feels similar to the optional Black Pits mode Beamdog added to the enhanced edition of Baldur's Gate in 2012. Many players have recommended completing Icewind Dale and then taking the party into Heart of Winter, but skipping Trials of the Lure Master. And beyond a single Lure Master run for those who absolutely adore Icewind Dale's combat, I can't really disagree with that advice. Although Icewind Dale didn't generate the same enthusiasm from fans as Baldur's Gate, there are still a lot of interesting additions that could improve your first experience or future replays. As is standard with the Infinity Engine, you'll have no trouble finding new portraits and voice packs for your characters, from original content to classic fantasy art. There are also unofficial patches and tweak packs, allowing you to customize certain aspects of the game to your liking. Anything from supporting widescreen resolutions to increased potion stacking or changing the way armor values work. For this replay, I used a fix pack and a mod that restored the original Baldur's Gate 1 character sprites from before Heart of Winter. I also recommend Unfinished Business. Like its Baldur's Gate version, this mod restores some content that was partially implemented or abandoned by the developer sometime before the game's final release. For those who miss Baldur's Gate 2 style party members, there's an Icewind Dale NPC project offering 5 pre-generated characters with custom portraits and voice packs who engage in party banter and can even be befriended or romanced. Other substantial mods include full overhauls to the rule set, new quests and encounters like the Aural's Bane or Return to Easthaven mods, and even an ambitious attempt at converting Icewind Dale to the Baldur's Gate 2 engine. Though if the latter interests you, you might be better off just looking into Beamdog's Enhanced Edition. Many years after release, portions of Icewind Dale were recreated in the Neverwinter Nights toolset, and the original campaign was completely remade in Neverwinter Nights 2, as the appropriately named Icewind Dale Neverwinter Nights 2 mod. I've never played it myself, though there is a Let's Play of the module on YouTube if you're interested. I think it speaks well of Icewind Dale that, despite all its weaknesses, I still run through it once every few years, which is more than I can say for the interminably dull Pillars of Eternity, or, I'm sorry to say, Planescape Torment, which lacks engaging gameplay to give it replay value. Black Isle set their sights on a simple, fun, unambitious classic fantasy dungeon romp, and that's exactly what they achieved. Icewind Dale proves that making something with just the right blend of accessibility and complexity is a lot harder than it seems. That's probably why we haven't seen its like since, with the hack and slash genre becoming either increasingly casualized for console and online play, or more compartmentalized for hardcore tactical RPG combat fans. But whatever the future holds, the bloodied slopes and penumbral tombs of the spine of the world will always be waiting.